My own family banned me from a luxury cruise right at the terminal, tossing a $50 gift card at my chest and telling me they had no place for a blue-collar worker like me. I just smiled and stood my ground. They had no idea that a few minutes later the ship's chief officer would march right past them, look me dead in the eye, and say, "Welcome aboard, Captain." Even my parents were left absolutely speechless. I am Kendra, 35 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the designated punching bag of my family. I spent years clawing my way to the top of a demanding industry, leaving their toxic expectations behind, but I still held on to a tiny shred of hope that they could change. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who constantly underestimated your worth and tried to put you in your place. Growing up in an affluent African American household in Atlanta meant appearances were everything. But behind the perfectly manicured lawn and the Sunday church outfits, emotional coldness permeated every corner of our lives. My younger sister Chloe was the golden child. She was pageant beautiful, loud, and completely dependent on my parents' praise. I was the quiet one, the one who liked to study weather patterns and naval history, the one who was repeatedly told to stop dreaming so big. Last month, my mother Vivian called me with what sounded like an olive branch. She said the whole family was going on a 2-week luxury Caribbean cruise on the Royal Azure to celebrate her and my father James' retirement. She practically begged me to come, saying they had already booked the ultimate VIP suite for me right next to theirs. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was their way of finally acknowledging my hard work. I should have known better. The betrayal unfolded in the chaotic, high-end VIP boarding lounge at the Port of Miami. The air conditioning inside the massive terminal hummed loudly, a sharp contrast to the sweltering Florida heat outside. The VIP section was a sea of plush white leather seating, crystal chandeliers, and sharply dressed attendants carrying trays of champagne. I arrived a little late, wearing a simple tailored blazer and slacks, deliberately keeping a low profile. I spotted my family huddled near the premium boarding gates. Chloe was draped in a loud designer sundress that screamed new money. Standing next to her was her husband Todd, a white tech bro with a trust fund who always acted like he owned whatever room he walked into. Todd was wearing a pastel polo shirt and expensive loafers without socks, looking every bit the entitled brat he was. My parents stood just behind them, sipping sparkling water and looking around to make sure the other wealthy passengers were admiring them. I walked over, pulling my sleek rolling suitcase behind me. "Hey everyone," I said, offering a tight but genuine smile. I am so glad I could make it. The traffic on the causeway was a nightmare. Instead of a greeting, Chloe turned to me with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. Todd let out a loud, arrogant sigh and reached into the pocket of his tailored shorts. He pulled out a piece of plastic and, without a word, condescendingly tossed it right at my chest. The plastic hit my lapel with a sharp smack and clattered onto the pristine marble floor. I looked down. It was a $50 Uber gift card. I slowly looked back up at Todd. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "That is your ride home," Kendra, Todd said, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into a country club. "We canceled your boarding pass this morning." I felt a sharp prickle of heat rise in the back of my neck, but I kept my face perfectly neutral. "You canceled my ticket," I repeated, looking past him to my sister. "Chloe, what is he talking about?" Chloe rolled her eyes and adjusted her massive sunglasses. "Do not make a scene, Kendra," she hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "Todd has some very vital tech investors who decided to join the cruise at the last minute. They needed a premium suite, and well, yours was the only one available to transfer. You understand, right? His startup is about to go public. He needs to impress these guys." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her words wash over me. "You waited until I drove 3 hours to the port, until I walked into the terminal to tell me you gave my room away to strangers?" I asked. Todd scoffed, stepping closer to me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Look, Kendra, let us be real here. You are a blue-collar worker. You drive boats for a living. You would be completely out of place in the VIP section anyway. The captain's table is for executives and investors, not deckhands. You would not even know which fork to use at a formal dinner. Take the gift card, call a ride, and go back to whatever tugboat you work on. The adults have business to handle. The absolute disrespect in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. He actually thought he was putting me in my place. He thought his failing app and his trust fund gave him the right to humiliate me in public. He thought I was just some low-level sailor. He had no idea that I was not just a sailor. I was the senior fleet captain for Royal Azure Lines, and this massive billion-dollar vessel docked right outside the window was my ship. I looked at my parents, expecting them to intervene. "Mom." "Dad," I said, my voice low. "You are just going to stand there and let him do this." My mother Vivian adjusted her pearl necklace and sighed heavily, looking embarrassed not by Todd, but by me. "Oh, Kendra, please do not be difficult," she muttered, waving her hand dismissively. "Todd is right. This is a very important networking opportunity for him. You know, we remortgaged the house to help fund his company. We need this to go well. Besides, you always complain about family vacations anyway. Just take the $50 and go home. We will send you some pictures." My father James nodded in agreement, refusing to even make eye contact with me. "It is for the best, Kendra. You would just bring the mood down anyway." The pain of their rejection was sharp, but it was a familiar pain. They had always chosen Chloe. They had always chosen the illusion of wealth over their own flesh and blood. When I asked them to help co-sign my student loans for the Maritime Academy years ago, they told me it was a waste of money and that women did not belong at sea. But when Todd came along with a half-baked idea for a food delivery app, they handed over their retirement savings without a second thought. I looked down at the Uber gift card on the floor. I did not pick it up. Instead, I looked back at Todd, who was smirking triumphantly, thinking he had won. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I had spent 15 years navigating hurricanes, commanding crews of thousands, and docking massive vessels in the tightest ports in the world. I did not panic in a storm, and I certainly was not going to panic over a spoiled tech bro and his enablers. "I am not going anywhere, Todd," I said, my voice echoing with quiet, absolute authority. I folded my arms, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Todd's face flushed red with anger. "Are you deaf? I just told you that your ticket is canceled. You are not getting on that ship. Security is going to throw you out if you keep loitering here." I just smiled, a slow, cold smile that made Chloe shift uncomfortably on her feet. "We will see about that," I replied. I turned my body slightly, facing the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the magnificent Royal Azure cruise ship. The pristine white hull gleamed in the Miami sun. I did not need a boarding pass to get on that ship. I owned the bridge. And they were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to mutiny against the captain on her own turf. Before I could even take a step toward Todd, my mother, Vivian, closed the distance between us. She grabbed my upper arm, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into my skin with surprising force. Her face was pulled into a tight, artificial smile meant for the surrounding passengers, but her eyes were cold and furious. "Keep your voice down, Kendra," she hissed through her teeth. Her perfume, a heavy, expensive floral scent, suffocated the space between us. "You are embarrassing us. Todd has his senior partners arriving any minute now, and they are very important white men from Silicon Valley. We cannot afford to have them walk in here and see you acting like a loud, angry woman making a scene over a hotel room." I stared down at my mother's hand gripping my arm, and then looked directly into her eyes. I gently but firmly pulled my arm away from her grasp. "I am not making a scene, Mom," I said, my voice steady and measured. "I am simply asking why my own family invited me on a 2-week vacation only to cancel my ticket and toss a $50 gift card in my face." My father James stepped forward, flanking my mother. He adjusted the collar of his crisp linen shirt and let out a long, exasperated sigh. He looked at me with the exact same look of deep disappointment he had worn since I was a little girl. "Because, Kendra, sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family," he said. sounding like he was lecturing a slow child. Todd is on the verge of securing Series B funding for his app. These investors expect a certain level of luxury. They expect VIP treatment. When Todd told us he needed an extra suite for his lead investor, we all agreed that you would be the most understanding. After all, you are used to roughing it. You work on cargo ships or whatever it is you do. A luxury suite would be wasted on you anyway. The sheer delusion in his words was staggering. I work on passenger vessels, Dad. I corrected him, though I knew it was pointless. And I do not care about the suite. I care about the fact that you lied to me. You let me pack my bags, drive all the way down here, and stand in this terminal just so you could publicly dismiss me. Chloe stepped up next to Todd, wrapping her arm through his and resting her head on his shoulder. She looked at me with an expression of pure pity that made my stomach turn. Honestly, Kendra, you are being incredibly selfish right now, she drawled. Todd is building a legacy for this family. He is building generational wealth. What are you doing? You are wearing a uniform and taking orders. We remortgaged the house to ensure Todd's company succeeds. We are a team. You have always been so fiercely independent, so we figured you could just head back to your little apartment and enjoy a staycation. We will bring you back a magnet from the Bahamas. The mention of the remortgaged house struck a nerve I had buried a long time ago. I looked from my sister to my parents. The blatant hypocrisy was suffocating. Generational wealth. I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Mom. Dad, do you remember when I was accepted into the elite maritime academy? I needed a cosigner for my student loans. Just a signature. You refused. You sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that driving boats was not a respectable career for a young black woman. You told me that we did not have a single dime to spare and that I needed to be realistic and get a job at the local bank. My mother rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed that I was bringing up the past. That was different, Kendra. We did not have the liquidity back then. And frankly, we were trying to protect you from entering a male-dominated industry where you would inevitably fail. We were being realistic. Realistic, I scoffed. But when Todd, a man you had known for barely a year, came to you with a half-baked idea for another useless food delivery app, you suddenly found hundreds of thousands of dollars. You risked your own home, the home Grandma left us, to fund his lifestyle. You bought Chloe that designer wardrobe she is wearing right now so she could look the part of a tech CEO wife. Keep your voice down, Todd snapped, looking nervously toward the entrance of the VIP lounge. A group of wealthy-looking older white men in resort wear were walking through the glass doors. Todd immediately straightened his posture, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogant bully to eager servant. Those are the investors, Todd whispered frantically to Chloe and my parents. Do not let her ruin this. We need to look like the perfect, prosperous American family. If they think we have crazy relatives starting drama, they might pull the funding. They value stability. My mother immediately turned her back on me, physically blocking me from the view of the approaching men. She smoothed down Todd's polo shirt and gave him a beaming, proud, motherly smile. You go greet them, Todd. We will handle this, she said softly. Todd nodded, flashing $1 million smile, and walking over to shake hands with the men, laughing loudly at whatever joke they were making. Chloe watched him with hard eyes, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just treated her own sister like trash. My father took a step closer to me, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I will not let you ruin your sister's future, Kendra. Todd is giving Chloe the life she deserves. He is giving us the retirement we deserve. We made a business decision today. Your ticket was the collateral. Now be a good daughter for once in your life. Pick up that gift card and walk out those doors before port security drags you out. I stood there in the center of the lavish terminal, surrounded by people who shared my blood, but treated me like an infected wound. I looked at the way my parents fawned over Todd, a man who was secretly drowning in debt and using their money to keep up appearances. They were so desperate for validation, so desperate to be accepted into a world of wealth and privilege, that they were willing to throw their own flesh and blood overboard to buy their ticket. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was just the family scapegoat, the disappointment who worked a blue-collar job. They truly believed that Todd was the captain of their ship. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I slowly reached down and picked up the $50 gift card from the marble floor. My mother let out a small sigh of relief, thinking I had finally surrendered. She turned away from me, preparing to join Todd and his investors at the priority boarding lane. But I did not turn toward the exit. I slipped the plastic card into my blazer pocket and simply stood there watching them. My father frowned deeply. "What are you doing?" James demanded, his tone turning aggressive. "I told you to leave." "I am not leaving, Dad," I replied calmly, keeping my eyes locked on Todd, who was now leading his group of investors toward the exclusive VIP security scanner. "I am just going to stand right here and watch Todd try to board my ship." My mother let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Your ship? Lord have mercy, she has lost her mind." "Let her stand there, James. When security asks for her ticket, and she does not have one, they will escort her to the parking lot. We do not have time for this foolishness. Let us go." Without another word, my parents turned and walked away from me, rushing to catch up with Chloe and Todd. They lined up at the glowing blue VIP archway, laughing and chatting with the investors, eager to begin their luxurious vacation. I stood back and watched the scene unfold with absolute clarity. I watched Todd confidently hand his platinum boarding pass to the port agent. I watched him smile, thinking he owned the world, and I waited for the red light. The port agent, a young woman in a crisp white uniform, took the pass from Todd with a polite customer service smile. She scanned the barcode under the laser reader. Instead of the cheerful melodic chime that usually welcomed VIP guests, an obnoxious sharp beep echoed through the high ceilings of the lounge. The glowing archway instantly flashed a bright warning red. Todd chuckled, shaking his head as if the machine itself was simply incompetent. "Your scanner is glitching," he told the agent, his tone dripping with condescension. "Scan it again. I have important investors waiting to board." The agent frowned, her polite smile faltering as she looked at her computer screen. She scanned the pass a second time. The obnoxious beep sounded again, only this time it was accompanied by a secondary alarm, a low, rhythmic siren that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the VIP lounge. The digital display above the archway flashed two words in bold, capitalized letters: "Access denied." Todd's face dropped. "What do you mean, access denied?" he snapped, slamming his hand flat on the podium. "Do you know who I am? I am a platinum investor with this cruise line. I booked the 2 best suites on the entire ship. There is absolutely no way my access is denied. Fix your machine right now." "I am sorry, sir," the agent said, her voice tight but professional. "The machine is working perfectly. Your boarding pass has been flagged and suspended. In fact, all boarding has been temporarily halted." Before Todd could yell again, heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. 4 armed Port Authority guards quickly approached the gate, forming a solid human barricade between Todd and the boarding gangway. The head guard held up his hand, signaling for the entire lounge to quiet down. "Ladies and gentlemen," the guard announced, his voice booming over the ambient noise of the terminal. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but the Royal Azure is currently under a mandatory security hold. No passengers, regardless of ticket status, are permitted to board the vessel at this time. Please step back from the gates and await further instructions." The lounge erupted into panicked murmurs. The group of white investors who Todd had been practically drooling over exchanged nervous glances. One of them, an older man with silver hair, checked his heavy gold watch and sighed loudly, clearly unimpressed by the chaotic start to his luxury vacation. He muttered something to his colleague about amateur hour. Todd saw his investor checking his watch and completely lost his mind. His carefully crafted persona of a cool, collected tech CEO shattered into a million pieces. He lunged forward, pointing a frantic finger directly in the port agent face. "Listen to me, you glorified ticket ripper," Todd yelled, a thick vein bulging in his neck. "I paid tens of thousands of dollars for this trip. My company is about to go public. I have highly influential people standing right behind me, and you are embarrassing me. I demand that you let us through right now. I demand to speak to your manager. I demand to speak to whoever is holding up my vacation. Sir, I need you to step back away from the podium, the head guard warned, resting his hand near his radio. If you continue to raise your voice and threaten port staff, you will be removed from the terminal and banned from the premises entirely. Chloe immediately jumped in, grabbing Todd's arm not to pull him away, but to join the attack. Do not speak to my husband like he is a criminal! She shrieked, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose. We are VIPs. We are supposed to be sipping champagne on our private balcony right now. Somebody better explain what this security hold is before I call our legal team and sue this entire port. I watched the entire spectacle from my spot by the floor-to-ceiling windows, my arms still casually folded across my chest. It was a masterclass in entitlement. Growing up, my mother Vivian always taught Chloe and me that as Black women we had to be twice as composed, twice as quiet, and twice as perfect to get half the respect in the professional world. Yet here she was, fiercely defending a mediocre white man who was acting like a spoiled toddler in public. She was more worried about his embarrassment than the fact that he was threatening working-class employees. My parents, Vivian and James, were hovering nervously in the background, looking utterly mortified. My mother kept shooting apologetic smiles at the investors, trying to smooth over the disaster, but the damage was done. The facade of the perfect, prosperous family was cracking right in front of them, and I had a front-row seat. My father stepped up, trying to play the peacemaker to save face. "Officer, please," he said, using his most diplomatic voice. "There must be some mistake. We are good people. We have no security issues. Can you at least tell us who ordered this hold so we can clear this up immediately?" The guard remained entirely unfazed by their collective tantrum. "The order came directly from the bridge," he stated flatly. "The captain of the Royal Azure has placed the vessel on a temporary lockdown. Boarding will not commence until the captain personally gives the all-clear and reviews the passenger manifest. That is strict maritime protocol. There is absolutely nothing we can do down here until the bridge calls down." Todd let out a loud, exasperated groan, grabbing the sides of his head. "Then call the bridge," he demanded, gesturing wildly toward the massive ship outside the window. "Get this so-called captain on the radio right now and tell him Todd is waiting. Tell him I will personally see to it that he loses his command if he does not open these doors in the next 5 minutes. I do not care what imaginary security threat he thinks is happening. I am the VIP here, and my time is money." I could not help but laugh. It was a soft sound, but in the sudden tense silence of the lounge it carried perfectly. My mother whipped her head around and glared at me, her eyes wide with fury. "Kendra, shut your mouth!" she hissed, abandoning the investors to rush over to me. "Why are you still here? Are you enjoying this? Are you happy that Todd is being humiliated in front of his business partners? This is exactly why we did not want you on this trip. You bring bad energy wherever you go. Now get out before you make things even worse." I did not move a single muscle. I just looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of pity for her. She was so blinded by her desperation for high society status that she could not see the reality of the situation. "I am not causing this, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy radiating from her. "Todd is humiliating himself. I am just standing here watching the consequences unfold." "What consequences?" she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "You do not know anything about how the real world works. You drive boats. You do not understand high-level business." "I know exactly how this world works," I replied slowly, letting my eyes drift back to the panicked port agents and the furious guards. "I know that when you disrespect the people in charge, you do not get to board the ship." Todd, having overheard my voice, spun around and pointed a trembling finger at me. "You!" he shouted, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "Are you laughing at me? You think this is funny? You are nothing. You are a glorified deckhand who could not even afford a ticket to this terminal without my charity." "Get her out of here," he demanded, turning to the guards. "She does not even have a ticket anymore. She is trespassing. Kick her out. The head guard looked at me, then back at Todd. Sir, we are currently dealing with a ship-wide security hold. I suggest you calm down and step aside. I will not step aside, Todd screamed, hitting the podium one last time. I want to speak to the captain. I want him down here facing me right now. As if on cue, the heavy frosted glass doors leading to the private gangway slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. A sudden hush fell over the immediate area as three figures stepped firmly into the VIP lounge. Leading the group was Chief Officer Elias, my trusted second-in-command. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 40s, wearing an immaculate bright white dress uniform, complete with gold trim, gleaming brass buttons, and highly polished black shoes. Two burly ship security officers flanked him, their expressions deadpan, and their hands resting casually near their radios. Todd saw the heavy gold stripes on Elias' shoulders, and his chest puffed out with immediate, arrogant validation. He straightened his pastel polo shirt and marched right past the port guards, moving directly into Elias' path like he owned the entire terminal. Finally, someone with some actual authority, Todd declared, throwing his hands up in exasperation and blocking the officer's way. Listen to me, officer. Your port staff is completely incompetent. I am a platinum-tier investor with this cruise line. I am supposed to be in the premium suite right now, and they are telling me some paranoid captain put the ship on lockdown. I want this cleared up immediately, and I want whoever is responsible for this delay fired by the end of the day. Elias did not slow his pace. He did not blink. He did not even look at Todd. With the smooth, practiced grace of a man who dealt with ocean storms and unruly passengers for a living, Elias simply stepped around Todd as if he were nothing more than a misplaced piece of luggage on the deck. Hey, Todd barked, turning around in angry confusion. I am talking to you. Where do you think you are going? The crowd of waiting passengers parted instinctively as Elias walked purposefully across the marble floor, heading straight toward the back of the lounge where I was standing. My parents watched him pass, their eyes wide with confusion. Chloe lowered her oversized designer sunglasses, her mouth hanging slightly open as she tried to figure out why this high-ranking officer was ignoring her very important husband. Elias stopped squarely in front of me. He snapped his heels together, the sound echoing sharply in the painfully quiet room. He stood at perfect military attention, keeping his back perfectly straight, and executed a crisp, flawless salute. Welcome aboard, Captain Kendra, he said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the lounge, reaching every single person present. The bridge is secured, all pre-departure checks are complete, and we are awaiting your order to commence boarding. The silence that followed those words was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that sucked the air right out of the room. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant cry of a seagull outside, and absolutely nothing else. Chloe dropped her designer handbag. It hit the floor with a dull thud, spilling her lipsticks and compacts across the polished marble, but she did not even notice. She just stared at me, her face draining of all color, her perfectly glossed lips trembling. My mother Vivian looked like she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. Her jaw was slack, her eyes darting frantically between me and the chief officer, as if her brain could not process the image standing directly in front of her. My father James took a stumbling step backward, bumping into one of the wealthy tech investors. For 15 years they had belittled my career. They had told their country club friends that I just drove boats or worked as a simple deckhand. They had actively hidden my achievements because they did not fit the narrative they wanted to project. They refused to understand that the Maritime Academy was not a trade school, but a grueling elite institution that trained rigorous leaders to command billion-dollar vessels. And now the reality of who I was and the massive authority I wielded was staring them right in the face. Todd was the first to break the suffocating silence. His fragile ego simply rejected the information. He marched over his face, twisted in an ugly mix of rage, disbelief, and deep insecurity. He aggressively stepped right into the space between Elias and me, pointing a shaking, sweating finger at my second-in-command. "Are you out of your mind?" Todd yelled, spit flying from his lips. Are you confused, buddy? She is not the captain. She is my wife's sister. She is a low-level deckhand who could not even afford a ticket on this ship without my charity. You have the wrong woman. I demand you get the real captain down here before I call corporate and have your badge stripped right now. Elias lowered his hand from his salute, but his posture remained rigid. He looked at Todd with a gaze so cold it could have frozen seawater. Sir Elias said, his voice dangerously calm and laced with warning. You are currently shouting at the senior fleet captain of the Royal Azure Lines. I highly suggest you step back and lower your voice immediately. She is not a captain! Todd screamed, his voice cracking in desperation. Look at her! She is not even wearing a uniform! She is a fraud! I kept my eyes locked on Todd as I calmly reached into the breast pocket of my tailored blazer. I did not rush. I let the agonizing anticipation hang in the air, making him sweat. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the pins. I slowly pulled out my black and gold epaulets. The 4 thick gold stripes denoting absolute command gleamed beautifully under the crystal chandeliers of the terminal. With deliberate slow movements, I slid the first epaulet onto the shoulder strap of my blazer and snapped it into place. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I took the second epaulet and snapped it onto my other shoulder. The transformation was instant and undeniable. I was no longer just Kendra, the family scapegoat, the woman they had handed a $50 gift card to just moments ago. I was the absolute highest authority on the magnificent vessel that towered outside the window, and every single person in that room knew it. I took one step forward, closing the distance between Todd and myself, forcing him to look up at me. He instinctively shrank back, his eyes darting frantically to the 4 gold stripes on my shoulders. The sheer panic in his eyes, the sudden realization that he had just threatened the most powerful person in the room, was the sweetest thing I had ever witnessed. You are speaking to the Captain Todd, I said, my voice low, smooth, and completely devoid of fear. I do not drive boats. I command a fleet. And right now, you are trespassing on my ship. Todd opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked back over his shoulder at his group of wealthy tech investors. They were not looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with profound embarrassment and disgust. The silver-haired lead investor shook his head, turned his back on Todd, and muttered something to the port guard about finding a more professional business partner. My mother finally found her voice. Her tone shifted instantly from arrogant and dismissive to cloying and desperate. Kendra, she stammered, taking a cautious step toward me, her hands outstretched. Kendra, honey, we did not know. We had no idea you were promoted to this level. Why did you not tell us you were the captain? Because, Mom, I replied, keeping my gaze fixed entirely on her wide, terrified eyes. I knew you would only care if it benefited you, and I knew Todd would try to exploit it. But we are family, my father chimed in, trying to muster a warm, fatherly smile that looked more like a painful grimace. We are so proud of you, sweetheart. You have to tell your officer here to let us on board. Todd has those important meetings. We can celebrate your amazing promotion at the VIP table tonight. It will be wonderful, just family. I looked at the people who had just 20 minutes ago told me I did not belong at their table and ordered me to take an Uber home. They were scrambling desperately, trying to rewrite the narrative to save their own skin and preserve their luxury vacation. Chloe was actually holding her breath, waiting for me to magically forgive them and grant them access to the royal treatment they felt they were owed. I turned slightly to face my officer. Mr. Elias, I said formally. Yes, Captain, he responded immediately, standing at attention. The security hold is officially lifted, I announced, my voice projecting clearly to the port agents. You may commence general passenger boarding. However, please inform the gate agents that the party under Todd's name has a severely restricted status due to security violations at the scanner. Todd's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. Restricted status, he repeated weakly, his previous arrogance completely evaporated. What does that mean? It means I am feeling generous today, Todd. I smiled coldly. I am not going to have you arrested by port authority for threatening my staff. I will let you board my ship, but you can forget about the VIP suite. Todd's face went from a sickly green to a violent shade of purple. The thick veins in his neck bulged against his pastel polo shirt so much I thought they might actually snap. He took a stumbling step backward and pulled a sleek gold-plated smartphone from his pocket with visibly trembling hands. Forget about the VIP suite, he sputtered, his voice rising to a hysterical, breathless pitch. You are out of your mind. You do not have the authority to downgrade me or talk to me like some common criminal. I am a platinum-tier investor. Do you hear me? I personally know the regional vice president of Royal Azure Lines. I play golf with the board of directors in Silicon Valley. You think a fancy jacket and some shiny pins give you the right to mess with my money and my business? I am calling corporate right now, and I am going to have you fired before you even step foot on that bridge. He began aggressively tapping the screen of his phone, his breath coming in ragged, angry gasps. My mother, Vivian gasped, covering her mouth with her manicured hand, looking wildly around to see who was watching. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a toxic mix of fear and spite. Todd is right, Kendra, she snapped, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You cannot just abuse your power because you have always been jealous of our success. Todd invested heavily in this company. He is bringing important people on this trip. If you do not give us our premium suite back right now, he will completely ruin your career. Just apologize to him, fix the tickets, and we will pretend this little power trip never happened. I did not even look at Chloe. My eyes were locked entirely on Todd, who was holding his gold phone to his ear, listening to it ring. I let him wait for a few agonizing seconds. I let him feel that false, fleeting sense of power before I completely and systematically dismantled it. Are you familiar with the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, Todd? I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy air of the terminal lounge like a surgical scalpel. It is commonly referred to in my industry as the ISPS code. Todd lowered the phone slightly, glaring at me with raw hatred. I do not care about your little boat rules, he spat. I am talking to the executive office. The ISPS code is not a boat rule. I corrected him, taking a slow, measured step forward, forcing him to look up at me. It is international maritime law enforced heavily by the United States Coast Guard and the Department of Homeland Security. And under that strict federal law, the master of the vessel, that is me, has absolute, unquestionable authority to determine who poses a threat to the safety and security of the ship, its crew, and its passengers. I am not a security threat, you lunatic, Todd yelled, though his voice cracked noticeably at the mention of Homeland Security. I am a paying VIP guest. I crossed my arms over my chest, the 4 thick gold stripes on my shoulders catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. You just caused a massive disturbance at a federal port checkpoint, I stated calmly. You aggressively threatened my gate agents. You attempted to forcefully bypass a mandatory security hold. And now you are standing here actively threatening the commanding officer of a commercial vessel with extortion and retaliation. In the eyes of international maritime law, Todd, you are no longer a VIP. You are a level 2 security risk. The expensive phone in Todd's hand slipped slightly, sliding down his sweaty palm. The automated voice of the cruise line corporate directory could be heard faintly buzzing from the tiny speaker, but he was no longer paying any attention to it. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. If you complete that phone call and attempt to leverage your financial status to intimidate a ship captain, I continued, my tone completely devoid of emotion. I will not just deny your boarding pass. I will have port security place you in flex cuffs right here on this marble floor. I will have the FBI port liaison charge you with interfering with maritime operations, which is a federal felony. You will face up to 5 years in federal prison, a $250,000 fine, and you will be placed on the global no-sail list for the rest of your natural life. The silence returned to the room, but this time it was suffocating and heavy with legal reality. The group of wealthy tech investors, who had been standing a few yards away listening to the entire exchange, suddenly turned their backs completely. The silver-haired lead investor shook his head in disgust and muttered to his associates before they all walked away from Todd, abandoning him entirely. My father. James swallowed hard, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the handle of his designer carry-on bag. Todd stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The sheer crushing weight of the federal consequences crashed down on him, grinding his fragile tech bro ego into fine dust. He looked over at Elias, my chief officer, who was still standing at perfect attention, his face a mask of stone-cold enforcement. Elias slowly and deliberately rested his large hand on the heavy black radio clipped to his belt, a silent, chilling confirmation that every single consequence I just listed would be executed in a matter of seconds. He is not making the call. Kendra, my mother suddenly cried out, her voice shrill and thick with blind panic. She practically lunged forward and snatched the gold phone right out of Todd's hand, pressing the end button repeatedly. Todd is just stressed from his business deals. He did not mean any of it. He respects your authority, Kendra. We all do. All. Please just let it go. We do not want any trouble with the federal police. Chloe grabbed Todd by the arm, pulling him back away from me. Todd, do not say another word, she whispered frantically. Her previous arrogant bravado completely erased by the threat of prison. If you get arrested, those investors will pull our startup funding immediately. We cannot afford a scandal right now. Just put the phone away and let her win this one. Todd looked at his wife, then at his terrified mother-in-law, and finally back at me. The realization that his money, his connections, and his fake high society status meant absolutely nothing on my territory was a bitter pill he was being forced to swallow dry. He slowly lowered his hands, his posture slumping in defeated rage. Are we absolutely clear, Todd? I asked, maintaining intense, unwavering eye contact. If you board my ship, you will follow my rules. You will speak to my crew with absolute respect. And you will never, ever raise your voice at me again. Do you understand me? He clenched his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack under the pressure. He gave a single stiff, agonizing nod. Yes, Captain, he muttered, looking at the floor. The words sounded like poison in his mouth. Excellent, I said, offering a sharp, humorless smile that did not reach my eyes. Now that we have firmly established the chain of command, we can proceed with your new accommodations. Mr. Elias. Yes. Captain Elias responded instantly, his voice booming with authority. Please escort this party to the guest services desk I ordered. Process their boarding passes, but permanently void the VIP suite transfer. They are to be reassigned to the standard interior cabins on Deck 4. Chloe let out a high-pitched, horrified gasp. Deck 4, she shrieked, her hands flying to her face in utter devastation. But those are interior rooms. There are no windows in those cabins. It is right next to the engine room. We cannot stay down there. We brought formal evening wear. We need the massive walk-in closets. Todd, tell her we cannot stay in the bottom of the ship. I turned on my heel, preparing to leave the lounge and head up the private gangway to the quiet sanctuary of my bridge. The premium VIP suites require a level of basic human decorum. This entire party has completely failed to demonstrate, I called out over my shoulder, not bothering to stop or look back at them. Enjoy the ambient noise of the heavy diesel engines, Chloe. I hear the vibrations are very soothing for people with bad attitudes. Before I could even reach the frosted glass doors of the private gangway, I heard the frantic clicking of my mother's heels rushing across the marble floor behind me. Kendra, wait, she called out, her voice cracking with desperate panic. I stopped and turned slowly. My mother Vivian and my father James were hurrying toward me, leaving Chloe and Todd standing frozen by the guest services desk. My father's face was flushed red with a mixture of anger and humiliation, while my mother looked like she was on the verge of a genuine collapse. You cannot be serious, Kendra. My father demanded, lowering his voice so the remaining terminal staff would not hear his pleading. You made your point. You showed everyone who is in charge. We get it. You are the captain. Now please tell your officer to give us our VIP access back. We are your family, for heaven's sake. You do not treat your own blood like common criminals. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life telling me I was not good enough. I am not treating you like criminals, Dad. I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. If I were treating Todd like a criminal, he would be in the back of a police cruiser right now. I am treating you like passengers who violated federal safety protocols. My mother reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip tight and trembling. Kendra, please, she begged, tears welling up in her eyes. Real tears this time, not the fake ones she used to get her way at the country club. This trip is supposed to be our retirement celebration. We bragged to everyone back in Atlanta about the premium suite. We told our church group we were dining at the captain's table. What am I supposed to tell them now? What are we going to tell Todd's investors? They are going to wonder why we are not in the VIP lounge with them. You can tell them the truth, Mom, I said, gently pulling my hand away from her grasp. You can tell them your son-in-law threw a tantrum at a federal checkpoint and got your privileges revoked. Or if that is too embarrassing, you can tell them you decided to experience the cruise, like the blue-collar workers you were so quick to insult 10 minutes ago. But we are family, my father repeated, his voice taking on a harder, demanding edge. Family looks out for each other. Family protects each other. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Family protects each other. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Where was that protection when Todd threw a $50 gift card at my chest and told me to get out? Where was that family loyalty when Chloe told me I was too low class to sit at your dinner table? You stood there and watched them humiliate me. You told me to leave. You only remembered we were family when you realized I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. My parents stared at me, completely stunned into silence. They had never heard me speak to them with such absolute, unyielding authority. For 35 years, I had been the peacekeeper, the one who swallowed my pride to keep the family intact. But the woman standing in front of them now was not their obedient scapegoat. I was the master of the vessel. I turned to Chief Officer Elias, who had walked up to stand beside me. Mr. Elias, ensure their luggage is redirected from the penthouse deck to deck 4, I instructed. And make sure they surrender their platinum lanyards before they board. Yes. Captain Elias nodded, turning his stern gaze toward my parents. Please step back to the desk, folks. We have a ship to load. I turned my back on them and walked through the glass doors, stepping onto the private enclosed gangway that led directly to the bridge. The heavy doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's quiet sobbing. I did not physically escort them to their new rooms, but as soon as I reached the bridge and took my seat in the command chair, I pulled up the ship's internal CCTV cameras on my primary monitor. I had a duty to ensure my security team was handling the downgrade without any further incidents from Todd. On the crisp, high-definition screen, I watched the brutal reality of their new situation set in. Down in the terminal, the VIP agent politely but firmly demanded their platinum lanyards. I watched Todd hand over his sleek black and gold VIP, pass his face a mask of pure, defeated agony. The agent handed them back basic blue plastic key cards, the kind issued to the lowest tier of standard passengers. Because they were no longer VIPs, they were not allowed to use the private skybridge. Instead, Elias escorted them to the main gangway. I watched my family merge into a crowd of thousands of regular, excited vacationers. Chloe was holding her designer sundress tightly against her body, looking around with an expression of sheer disgust, as if she might catch a disease from standing too close to the general public. Todd kept his head down, hiding his face beneath a baseball cap, desperate to avoid making eye contact with any of the wealthy investors who were boarding through the express lane above them. The camera feed switched as Elias led them inside the ship. They entered the grand atrium with its towering crystal chandeliers and glass elevators. Chloe looked hopeful for a brief second, thinking maybe the interior of the ship would make up for the humiliation. But Elias did not guide them toward the glass elevators that went up to the penthouse suites. He led them to the standard aft stairwell and pointed down. They descended past the plush carpets of Deck 8. They went down past the lively promenade on Deck 7, down past the dining rooms on Deck 5. Finally, they arrived at Deck 4. The lighting here was not the warm, ambient glow of the upper decks. It was bright fluorescent and unforgiving. The hallways were narrower, designed for maximum occupancy rather than luxury. And underneath their feet was the undeniable, heavy, rhythmic thrum of the ship's massive diesel engines. It was a constant low vibration that you could feel right in your teeth. Elias stopped in front of cabins 4102 and 4104. He swiped his master keycard, opening the doors for them before giving a polite nod and walking away to resume his duties. I zoomed the camera in slightly as Chloe stepped into her new room. The cabin was exactly 150 square feet. There were 2 small twin beds bolted to the floor, a tiny desk, and absolutely no windows. The walls were painted a sterile beige, decorated only by a cheap framed print of a generic beach. I watched Chloe drop her $1,000 handbag onto the floor. She turned to Todd, her mouth wide open in a scream of absolute horror, though the cameras did not pick up the audio. She gestured wildly to the tiny closet, realizing instantly that her massive collection of designer evening gowns would never fit inside. Todd just slumped onto the edge of the twin bed, burying his face in his hands, entirely defeated. I sat back in my leather command chair, feeling the deep, powerful hum of my ship beneath me. I had given them a place on my vessel, but I had also given them a harsh dose of reality. The illusion of their wealth and superiority was stripped away, leaving them in a windowless box at the bottom of the ocean, and the voyage had not even started yet. I reached forward and toggled the audio control on my security console. While the interior of the passenger cabins did not have audio recording, for obvious privacy reasons, the narrow crew corridors and lower passenger hallways of Deck 4 were fully equipped with high-definition security microphones. I watched the screen as Chloe, completely unable to contain her rage within the claustrophobic walls of her assigned room, stormed out into the narrow hallway. She hammered her fist repeatedly against the heavy metal door of cabin 4102, where my parents had just been banished. The door swung open, revealing my mother, Vivian. She looked exhausted, her perfectly styled hair already beginning to frizz from the humidity of the lower decks. Before Vivian could even speak, Chloe launched into a full-blown meltdown. "I cannot stay in this closet, Mom!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the low metal ceilings. "There is no balcony. There is not even a porthole. I cannot breathe in there, and the floor is literally shaking. It smells like cheap diesel fuel and industrial cleaner. Todd has severe asthma, you know this. We cannot survive 2 weeks down here." My father James stepped out into the hallway behind Vivian, his face a mask of simmering fury. "Do not yell at your mother, Chloe," he snapped. "We are in the exact same box right next door. You think we want to be down here? We were supposed to be in the penthouse. We were supposed to be drinking champagne. Instead, I am vibrating so hard my teeth hurt." Todd stepped out of his cabin, lingering behind his wife. He had his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking like a scolded child, but he still tried to maintain his unearned arrogance. "Look, James, I will talk to the concierge," Todd said, trying to sound authoritative. "I will throw some money around and get us upgraded. Kendra is just throwing a temper tantrum. She will calm down by dinner." My father let out a harsh, bitter laugh that cut through the constant thrum of the engine room. "Throw some money around," he repeated, stepping aggressively into the narrow hallway, forcing Todd to step back. "What money, Todd? Are you going to use that declined credit card of yours?" Vivian gasped, grabbing my father's arm. "James, keep your voice down," she hissed, looking nervously up and down the empty corridor. "Anyone could be listening." "I do not care who is listening," my father yelled, throwing his hands up in defeat. "We are at the bottom of the ocean, Vivian. The facade is over. We bet everything on this kid and his stupid tech company, and look where it got us." Todd's face flushed a deep, angry red. My startup is going through a transitional scaling phase, James. I told you that. Tech companies take time to turn a profit. You have to spend money to make money. Spend money. My father echoed, his voice trembling with a rage I had never seen him direct at anyone but me. We gave you $200,000, Todd. We took out a second mortgage on the house Vivian mother left us. We lied to our friends. We lied to the bank. We funded your fancy cars and your country club memberships because you promised us a massive return on investment. You told us this cruise was going to secure the final round of funding. Chloe stepped in front of Todd, fiercely defending the man who was actively ruining her family. Leave him alone, Dad, she yelled. He is trying his best. It is not his fault Kendra decided to be a vindictive, power-hungry monster. If Kendra had just let us keep the suite, Todd could have closed the deal tonight. She ruined everything. She did not ruin anything, Chloe, my father fired back, his voice dropping to a harsh, painful register. Your husband ruined it when he decided to throw a tantrum at a federal checkpoint. And you know what the worst part is? The worst part is the irony of it all. He leaned against the metal wall of the corridor, rubbing his temples as if fighting off a massive headache. Do you remember when Kendra came to us 10 years ago? He asked, looking at my mother. Do you remember when she laid out her acceptance letters to the Maritime Academy on the kitchen table? She did not ask for cash. She just asked for our signatures on a student loan application. Vivian looked away, her face suddenly pale. James, please do not do this right now. I will do this right now, my father insisted. We told her no. We told her she was a bad investment. We told her that her dreams of being a ship captain were foolish, and that we did not have a single dime to risk on a career that would lead nowhere. We treated our own daughter like a burden because we wanted to save our pristine credit score. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Todd. But when this guy showed up with a slideshow and a fake smile, we handed over the deed to our home. We bet against our own blood, and we bet on a fraud. And now the daughter we called a bad investment is driving a billion-dollar vessel, making a massive salary, and holding our fate in her hands while we are sleeping next to the exhaust pipes. Sitting in my leather command chair, I felt a sharp, painful lump form in my throat. Hearing the truth spoken aloud, completely unfiltered by their usual country club manners, was like taking a physical blow to the chest. They knew exactly what they had done. They knew they had sacrificed my future to fund Chloe and Todd's toxic lifestyle. The only reason my father was angry now was not out of guilt for how they treated me, but because his gamble had failed. He was not sorry he hurt me, he was sorry he was broke. Todd scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. You made a business decision, James. Do not act like you are the victim here. You wanted the payout just as much as I did. And do not pretend Kendra is some massive success story. She got lucky. Diversity hires are very trendy right now. That comment pushed Chloe over the edge, but not in the way I expected. She turned on Todd, her eyes blazing. Diversity hire, she screamed, slapping his shoulder. Did you not see the way that chief officer looked at her? Did you not see the 4 stripes on her shoulders? She is the boss, Todd. She has absolute power on this ship, and you completely humiliated us in front of her. I am going to fix it, Todd yelled back, running his hands through his hair in frantic frustration. I am not going to let a deckhand with an ego complex ruin my business. I have investors on this ship. I will find a way to get to the VIP lounge tonight, and I will handle this. I am going to end her little power trip. I reached out and completely muted the audio feed. The silence of the bridge washed over me, a stark contrast to the toxic, chaotic screaming match happening on deck 4. I took a deep breath, letting the steady, powerful vibrations of my ship ground me. Todd was arrogant enough to believe he could still outsmart me on my own territory. He actually thought he could sneak into a restricted area and sabotage my authority. He had no idea the level of surveillance and security that surrounded every inch of the Royal Azure. I tapped a sequence on my digital command console, bringing up the guest registry for the evening captain's gala. I had originally intended to let them rot down on Deck 4 for the entire 2 weeks, but hearing Todd threaten my career from the bottom of my ship changed my mind. If Todd wanted to play high society tech genius in front of his wealthy investors, I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to give him the biggest audience he had ever had. I picked up the heavy black radio microphone attached to my command chair and pressed the transmission button. Bridge to Chief Officer Elias. I spoke clearly. Elias answered immediately. Go ahead, Captain. Mr. Elias. I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. Please contact cabin 4104. Inform Mr. Todd that despite his earlier behavior, I have decided to graciously extend an invitation to him and his family for the captain's gala tonight. Let them know I expect them to be dressed to impress. Understood. Captain Elias replied, his voice betraying a hint of knowing amusement. Shall I alert ship security to increase their presence at the ballroom doors? Yes, Mr. Elias, I confirmed. And please have the IT department prepare the main ballroom projection screens. We might have a special presentation tonight. I watched the digital clock on my command console tick over to 1 in the afternoon. The Royal Azure had officially cast off, and we were smoothly navigating out of the port of Miami into the open waters of the Atlantic. The ship was buzzing with the excitement of embarkation day, but my attention was temporarily drawn back to the security feed from Deck 10. Todd and Chloe had apparently decided that the invitation to the captain's gala tonight meant their previous sins were forgiven. They had changed out of their travel clothes and were now dressed in what they considered high-end resort wear. Chloe was wearing a flowing silk cover-up that probably cost more than my first car, while Todd had swapped his pastel polo for a crisp linen button-down. They were not heading to the main buffet where their blue keycards granted them access. Instead, I watched them march straight toward the Azure Lounge, the highly exclusive VIP dining hall reserved only for penthouse guests and top-tier investors. The entrance to the Azure Lounge was guarded by a young junior crew member named Mateo, who had only been with the company for a few months. On the camera feed, I saw Todd casually lean against the mahogany podium, blocking Mateo from the view of the other staff. Todd reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it discreetly under a stack of menus. He gave Mateo a slick, conspiring wink and patted the young man's shoulder. Mateo, looking panicked and unsure of how to handle an aggressive passenger who clearly had money, simply stepped aside. Todd and Chloe confidently strolled into the lounge, acting as if they owned the entire ocean. I shook my head, letting out a heavy sigh. Todd just could not help himself. His fragile ego demanded that he prove he was still a VIP, even if he had to resort to cheap bribery to do it. I kept my eyes on the monitor as they selected a premium table right next to the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the ocean. Chloe immediately pulled out her phone and started taking selfies, posing with her best pout to maintain her flawless social media presence. Todd, meanwhile, walked over to the private chilled display near the bar. This area was strictly for VIP guests to select their own premium beverages. Without hesitating, Todd grabbed a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. It was a reserve bottle easily worth $2,000 retail. He carried it back to the table with a triumphant smirk. He did not ask a waiter to open it. He wanted to look like the alpha male for his wife. He grabbed the foil, twisted the wire cage, and popped the cork with a loud, celebratory bang that echoed through the elegant dining room. A few actual VIP guests turned their heads in annoyance. Among them, sitting just 2 tables away, were the Silicon Valley investors Todd had been so desperate to impress in the terminal. The silver-haired lead investor took one look at Todd's loud, obnoxious behavior and visibly cringed, turning his chair slightly to avoid making eye contact. I stood up from my command chair and smoothed the front of my uniform blazer. Mr. Elias, you have the con, I announced, stepping away from the monitors. I need to take a quick walk down to Deck 10. I believe we have a stowaway in the Azure Lounge. I took the private executive elevator down and walked briskly through the plush carpeted hallways. When I reached the entrance to the Azure Lounge, young Mateo saw me and immediately stood at rigid attention, his face going pale. Captain, he stammered nervously. I'm sorry, they just walked in and the man gave me cash, and I did not know how to stop them without causing a scene. I held up my hand to stop his apology. It is all right, Matteo, I said calmly. You are new. But for future reference, never accept a bribe from a passenger. I will handle this. I walked into the dining room. The atmosphere was a world away from the loud, crowded buffets on the lower decks. Soft, classical music played from hidden speakers, and the clinking of crystal glasses provided a gentle background noise. I navigated through the well-spaced tables, my eyes locked on Todd and Chloe. They were laughing, clinking their champagne flutes together. Chloe was busy typing a caption for her latest photo, probably bragging about the VIP lifestyle to her thousands of fake internet friends. I stopped right at the edge of their table. The heavy gold stripes on my sleeves rested casually near the edge of the crisp white tablecloth. I hope the vintage selection meets your high standards, Todd. I said, my voice completely level but loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. Chloe nearly choked on her drink, coughing and quickly putting her glass down. Todd froze, his triumphant smile instantly vanishing. He looked up at me, his eyes darting toward the investors sitting nearby, and then back to my uniform. Kendra, he whispered harshly, leaning forward. What are you doing here? We are just having a quiet lunch. We are celebrating the gala invitation. Do not ruin this for us. You are not supposed to be in this lounge. Todd, I replied, picking up the heavy empty bottle of Dom Perignon and inspecting the label. Your blue keycards only grant you access to the main dining halls. But beyond the simple fact that you bribed a junior crew member to trespass in a restricted area, you have also decided to help yourself to the premium reserves. It is just a bottle of champagne, Todd scoffed, trying to brush it off, waving his hand dismissively. Put it on my tab. I am good for it. You know I have the money, just charge the room and leave us alone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small thermal receipt I had printed on the bridge just before coming down. I placed it gently on the table right next to his half-full glass. That is an interesting request, Todd, I noted, maintaining my polite professional tone. Because under international maritime law, removing high-value inventory from a restricted area without authorization is technically considered theft of ship stores. However, since you opened it, I decided to process it as a salvage purchase. I have officially charged the $2,000 to the primary credit card you placed on file for your onboard expense account. Todd rolled his eyes, picking up the receipt with a smug expression. Fine, he said, pulling out his phone. $2,000 is nothing. I will write it off as a business expense. Are we done here, Captain? Not quite, I smiled, leaning in just a fraction of an inch closer. I watched the blood slowly drain from his face as he actually read the words printed at the bottom of the receipt. By the way, Todd, I announced, my voice clear and perfectly audible to the investors sitting at the next table. Your card was just declined. The silence that hit their table was absolute. Chloe's mouth dropped open in sheer horror. She looked at Todd, who was staring at the small piece of thermal paper as if it were a venomous snake. Declined. Chloe repeated, her voice a high-pitched squeak. Todd. What does she mean, it was declined? We have a $50,000 limit on that card. Todd swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly. There must be a mistake with the bank. He stammered, his confident tech CEO persona completely crumbling. A fraud alert. Because we are in international waters. That is it. A simple fraud alert. It is not a fraud alert, I corrected him mercilessly. The banking system clearly indicates insufficient funds. Your account is completely maxed out, Todd. You do not have $2,000 to cover the champagne you just stole. The lead investor at the next table let out a soft, unmistakable scoff of amusement. Todd heard it. He closed his eyes, the deep red flush of utter humiliation creeping up his neck and spreading across his cheeks. He had spent months convincing these men that he was a wealthy genius, worthy of their millions, and in less than 60 seconds, I had exposed him as a broke fraud who could not even afford his own drinks. Since your card is declining, Todd, I continued picking up the receipt and folding it neatly. I will have the accounting department hold this debt against your final disembarkation bill. If you cannot secure the funds by the end of the voyage ship, security will hold you at the port until local authorities arrive to process the theft. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically sick. She pushed her chair back, grabbing her designer bag with shaking hands. "We are leaving," she whispered, standing up quickly and keeping her face turned away from the other guests. "Todd, get up." "Todd, let us go right now." Todd did not argue. He did not yell. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He stood up, his shoulders slumped, and followed his wife toward the exit. I stood by the window watching them do the walk of shame out of the beautiful azure lounge, heading back toward the elevators that would take them down to the windowless reality of Deck 4. They were slowly realizing that they were completely trapped in a world where my word was law and their fake money held no power at all. I watched the glass elevator doors slide shut on Deck 10, swallowing Todd and Chloe in their profound humiliation. They were descending back into the reality they had worked so hard to avoid. I turned away from the observation window and walked back onto the bridge, taking my seat at the command console. The ocean ahead was a brilliant sapphire blue, and for a brief moment I let the steady hum of my ship wash over me. I hoped that the embarrassment in the azure lounge would finally force them to keep a low profile for the rest of the voyage. I should have known that toxic people do not reflect on their failures, they simply look for someone else to blame. My peace lasted exactly 45 minutes. The secure comms line on my console chimed sharply. It was Maria, the chief purser, who managed all passenger accounts and guest relations. "Captain, we have a situation in my private office behind the main reception desk." Maria said, her usually calm voice tight with frustration. "Your sister and brother-in-law are here. Your sister is screaming at my staff and threatening to call the FBI on our IT department. I thought it best to pull them off the public floor, but they are demanding to speak with you immediately." I let out a slow, measured breath. "Keep them in your office, Maria," I replied. "I will be right down." I took the staff elevator down to Deck 5 and walked through the hidden crew corridors that bypassed the crowded passenger atrium. When I opened the door to the purser private office, the sheer volume of Chloe's hysterical voice hit me like a physical wave. She was pacing the length of the small room, waving her phone in the air, while Todd sat rigidly in a leather guest chair, his arms crossed, defensive and angry. My mother, Vivian, was hovering near the corner, wringing her hands in distress. "You cannot tell me this is a coincidence," Chloe was yelling at Maria, who stood firmly behind her desk. "We had $50,000 in available credit this morning. And then my vindictive sister decides she wants to ruin our trip, and suddenly our cards are frozen. She hacked us. I know she did." I closed the heavy acoustic door behind me, cutting off her tirade. "Nobody hacked you, Chloe," I said, stepping fully into the room. The 4 gold stripes on my shoulders seemed to make the small space feel even smaller. Chloe whipped around, her eyes red and furious. "Do not lie to me, Kendra," she hissed, stepping toward me. "You were so mad that Todd told you the truth about your blue-collar life in the terminal that you decided to use your little ship computers to freeze our accounts. You probably logged into the ship's server and locked us out of our own money just to humiliate Todd in front of his investors. That is a federal cybercrime." I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her accusation hang in the quiet office. Then I looked past her and locked eyes with Todd. He was the supposed tech genius, the man who was building an app that would change the world. He knew exactly how network security worked, and he knew exactly why his card had bounced. But instead of telling his wife the truth, that he was completely out of money, he was letting her construct an insane conspiracy theory to protect his fragile ego. "Todd," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "are you seriously going to sit there and let your wife accuse the captain of a commercial vessel of committing international wire fraud? You claim to be a tech CEO. Please explain to Chloe how a maritime navigation server operating on satellite internet in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, could magically bypass the encrypted firewalls of a mainland financial institution just so I could cancel your champagne order. Todd swallowed hard, refusing to make eye contact with me. He looked at the floor, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "We are on your ship, Kendra," he muttered weakly. "You control the Wi-Fi network. You could have intercepted our banking data when we logged in this morning. It is corporate sabotage." The blatant lie was so pathetic, it was almost funny. He was desperately clinging to his billionaire persona, even as the walls closed in around him. He would rather invent a felony than admit to his wife and mother-in-law that he was a total fraud. My mother Vivian suddenly stepped forward, placing herself between me and Chloe, as if she were breaking up a schoolyard fight. Enough, she declared, her voice trembling with that familiar anxious energy she always got when our family image was threatened. "It does not matter how it happened. What matters is that we are on a luxury cruise and Todd Card is currently experiencing a technical glitch. We cannot have him looking like a fool in front of those Silicon Valley men." She reached out and grabbed my forearm, her grip tight and desperate. "Kendra, you are the captain. You make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You have ultimate authority over this entire boat. You need to fix this right now." "Fix it how exactly, Mom?" I asked, staring down at her hand until she slowly let go of my arm. "I want you to comp our accounts," Vivian demanded, her tone shifting from pleading to entitled in a fraction of a second. "Clear the balance on that champagne. Upgrade us back to the VIP suite. Give Todd and Chloe an unlimited onboard credit line until Todd Bank sorts out this ridiculous security freeze. It is the absolute least you can do after embarrassing him in the dining room." I looked at my mother, truly trying to find a trace of the woman who used to teach me right from wrong when I was a little girl. But all I saw was a woman so consumed by respectability politics and the illusion of high society that she was willing to enable a con artist while demanding her own daughter foot the bill. "Think about how this looks, Kendra." My mother continued, lowering her voice into a harsh whisper. "Those investors saw Todd Card get declined. If word gets back to our church in Atlanta that we spent this entire trip eating at the free buffet and sleeping in the basement, we will be a laughingstock. Oh. You are my daughter. You owe us your protection. Just swipe your MasterCard and make this go away." I took a slow, deliberate step back, physically separating myself from their shared delusion. "I am the captain of the Royal Azure," I said, my voice echoing off the paneled walls of the small office. "My authority is granted to ensure the absolute safety and operational integrity of this vessel and its passengers. I am not your personal ATM, and I am certainly not here to fund a fake lifestyle you cannot afford." Chloe gasped, dramatically covering her mouth. "You are so selfish," she spat. "You have all this power, and you refuse to help your own family." "You are not asking for help, Chloe," I corrected her sharply. "You are asking me to subsidize a lie. Every single comped item on this ship is audited by the corporate finance department. If I grant you unlimited onboard credit without a valid financial reason, I am stealing from my own company to pay for your luxury vacation. I will not compromise my professional integrity, my career, or my ship to save Todd from the consequences of his own empty bank account." My father James had just walked into the office halfway through my sentence. He heard my refusal, and his face darkened into a scowl. "You always were a stubborn, ungrateful girl," he snapped, standing next to my mother. "We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We clothed you, we fed you, and I thanked you for it by building a life you never had to worry about." I fired back, cutting him off completely. "But I will not pay a single cent toward Todd expenses, not one dime. If you want premium champagne, you pay for it. If you want a suite, you pay for it. If your cards are declining, then I suggest you get very comfortable with the complimentary tap water and the standard buffet lines." Todd stood up, his face flushed a deep, violent red. "You think you have won, do you?" he sneered, trying to mask his panic with aggression. "You think because you wear that fancy jacket you can just walk all over me? I still have meetings scheduled with those investors by the main pool this afternoon. I do not need your fake onboard credit to prove my worth. I know more about the ocean and yachting than you ever will. I will secure that funding with or without your charity. I looked at Todd, feeling nothing but pure, icy disdain. Then I suggest you head up to the pool deck, Todd, I said, gesturing toward the door. But remember, you are a standard guest now. You do not have priority seating. Better go claim your lounge chair before the afternoon crowd gets there. Chloe let out a furious scream of frustration, grabbing Todd by the arm and dragging him out of the office. My parents followed close behind, shooting me identical glares of pure hatred before slamming the heavy acoustic door shut. Maria, the chief purser, let out a long breath she had clearly been holding. I am so sorry, Captain, she said softly. Do not apologize, Maria, I replied, straightening my uniform blazer. Just place a hard lock on their folios. No credit advances, no room charges. If they want so much as a bottle of sparkling water, they pay cash up front. I left the office and headed back to the bridge. Todd was cornered broke and desperate to prove his dominance to the wealthy men he was trying to scam. I knew exactly what kind of man he was, and I knew that a man like that, cornered on the open ocean, was bound to do something incredibly stupid. I just had to wait for him to drown himself. By mid-afternoon, the bright blue skies over the Atlantic began to shift. It is a completely normal weather pattern for this time of year, but to an untrained eye, the sudden buildup of dark gray clouds might look intimidating. I stood on the bridge looking out through the massive panoramic windows as the ocean swelled slightly. The ship radar indicated a mild squall moving across our path. It was nothing the Royal Azure could not handle with ease. I ordered a minor course adjustment of 2 degrees to port simply to minimize the turbulence for the passengers and maintain optimal cruising speed. I had just finished logging the course correction when Elias approached my station. His expression was a mix of professional concern and personal irritation. Captain, we have a developing situation on the Lido deck, he reported, handing me a digital tablet displaying a live security feed. It is your brother-in-law again. He is causing a disturbance near the main pool, and it is starting to affect the other guests. I took the tablet and tapped the screen to unmute the audio feed from the poolside microphones. The Lido deck was the premier outdoor lounging area, complete with a massive infinity pool, luxury cabanas, and a high-end cocktail bar. Despite the graying sky, the deck was still packed with passengers enjoying the warm tropical air. Sitting right in the center of the premium cabana section was Todd. He had managed to track down the group of Silicon Valley investors he had been chasing all morning. The silver-haired lead investor and his associates were lounging on the padded deck chairs, looking mildly annoyed by Todd's presence. The ship hit a gentle swell, causing a very slight roll. It was the kind of movement you barely notice unless you are looking for it. But Todd immediately grabbed the sides of his lounge chair, acting as if we had just been struck by a rogue wave. Did you feel that? Todd announced loudly, his voice carrying over the ambient music of the pool deck. That was a terrible overcorrection. She is steering us right into the trough of the wave. The lead investor frowned, looking up from his tablet. It just feels like a little wind, Todd. Nothing to worry about. That is where you are wrong, Todd insisted, standing up and walking to the edge of the pool, gesturing wildly toward the dark clouds on the horizon. I grew up around boats. I have extensive country club yachting expertise. I know how to read the water, and I am telling you right now, this ship is heading directly into a major squall. The navigation up on that bridge is completely incompetent. A few nearby passengers who were not part of the investor group stopped what they were doing and looked over. A woman in a floral swimsuit nervously grabbed her husband's arm, pointing toward the clouds Todd was highlighting. Todd saw that he was gathering an audience, and his ego completely took over. He paced back and forth, acting like a seasoned maritime expert giving a lecture. It is a classic mistake, he continued, his voice getting louder. You have a massive vessel like this, and they hand the wheel over to someone who has no business being in command. Do you know who the captain of this ship is? She is a diversity hire, a box-checking exercise for the corporate office. She does not have the instinct or the pedigree to navigate open waters. My jaw tightened as I listened to the audio feed. The sheer audacity of his words made my blood boil. He was not just insulting me personally anymore. He was undermining my professional authority and actively inciting fear among paying passengers. She is probably up there panicking right now, Todd sneered, leaning casually against a towel rack. If I were at the helm, I would have charted a course 50 nautical miles south of this system. But what do you expect when you hand a billion-dollar ship to someone who only got the job to make a brochure look good? We are probably going to be rocking violently all night because she does not understand basic hydrodynamic drag. The panic was starting to spread. Several passengers began packing up their beach bags, looking anxiously at the sky. A young mother hurried to the edge of the pool and told her children to get out of the water immediately. The investors exchanged uneasy glances, clearly disturbed by the growing commotion. The lead investor looked at his colleague and muttered something about safety protocols. Todd was thriving in the chaos. He felt powerful. He believed that by tearing me down and positioning himself as the knowledgeable alpha male, he could win back the respect of the investors. He was putting the comfort and safety of hundreds of people at risk just to stroke his own shattered ego. Elias leaned over, looking at the screen. "Shall I send a security detail to escort him back to his cabin?" Captain Elias asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "He is actively causing a panic and using derogatory language regarding your command." I stared at the screen, watching Todd bask in the fearful attention of the crowd. Sending security would only validate his narrative. He would play the victim. He would tell those investors that I was silencing him because he knew the truth. He would spend the rest of the voyage whispering in the shadows, claiming he was a martyr who tried to warn everyone. "No, Mr. Elias," I said slowly, placing the tablet down on the console. "Do not send security. I am going to handle this personally." I stood up from the command chair and straightened my uniform. Todd wanted to talk about hydrodynamic drag. He wanted to play sailor in front of a crowd. I was going to give him the exact lesson he was asking for. "Captain, the squall is expected to break in about 10 minutes. The navigation officer called out from the radar station. "It will be brief, but we will see some moderate rain and wind." "Perfect," I replied. "Keep our current heading and speed. The Royal Azure is built to cut through this kind of weather like a hot knife through butter." I left the bridge and headed for the executive elevator. The ride down to Deck 12 felt incredibly slow, but it gave me time to center my thoughts. I was not going to yell. I was not going to let him see that his racist, misogynistic comments had affected me. I was going to dismantle him with cold, hard, undeniable facts. When the elevator doors opened onto the Lido deck, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted from relaxed vacation to tense apprehension. More people had gathered near the cabanas, drawn by Todd's loud, dramatic predictions of disaster. My mother Vivian and my sister Chloe had apparently heard the commotion and joined him. Chloe was nodding along with his every word, looking at the other passengers with an expression of shared concern. "It is completely unacceptable," Chloe was telling a nervous-looking elderly couple. "My husband knows all about marine navigation. We are actually considering filing a formal complaint with the cruise line because the captain is clearly out of her depth." Vivian stood beside her, arms crossed, looking very pleased that Todd was finally commanding the attention of the wealthy investors again. "See," Vivian told the lead investor loudly. "This is why you need a strong, intelligent man like Todd on your executive board. He anticipates disaster before it even strikes." I stepped out of the elevator vestibule and walked onto the teakwood decking. The wind had picked up slightly, catching the edges of my blazer, but I walked with purposeful, steady strides. The crowd of passengers parted instinctively as I approached the heavy gold stripes on my sleeves, commanding immediate respect. I stopped right at the edge of the pool, standing directly across from Todd and his captivated audience. The dark clouds loomed behind me, framing the exact moment I decided to completely shatter his illusion. "I hear we have a yachting expert on board," I announced, my voice projecting clearly over the wind and the murmur of the crowd. I locked eyes with Todd, watching the smug smile instantly freeze on his face. "Let us test that expertise, Todd." Todd swallowed hard, but his fragile ego refused to let him back down in front of the Silicon Valley men. He puffed out his chest and pointed a finger toward the dark clouds looming on the horizon. "I said what I said, Kendra," he shot back, trying to sound authoritative. "Any amateur sailor can see that you are steering this vessel directly into the trough of that squall. You are maximizing our hydrodynamic drag instead of avoiding the weather system entirely. You should have charted a course 50 nautical miles south." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch for a moment so every single passenger could hear my response. "Hydrodynamic drag," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue. "That is a very impressive sounding phrase, Todd. It is a shame you have absolutely no idea what it means." Todd's face tightened. "I know exactly what it means," he snapped. "If you knew what it meant, Todd," I replied, stepping right up to the edge of the cabana, "you would know that hydrodynamic drag refers to the resistance created by the friction of the water against the hull of the ship. It affects our fuel efficiency and top speed. It has absolutely nothing to do with how a vessel pitches or rolls in a weather system. Furthermore, a ship of this size does not steer into the trough of a wave to maintain stability. We steer into the swell at a slight angle to allow our active stabilizing fins to slice through the water and reduce lateral motion. That is why the ship is barely moving right now despite the wind." A few people in the crowd murmured, looking from Todd to me. The panic that had been building just moments ago was instantly replaced by genuine curiosity and amusement. Todd realized he had used the wrong buzzword, but he doubled down, desperately pivoting to his next point. "Fine," he stammered, waving his hand dismissively. "So you know a few vocabulary words from your little training manuals. But you cannot deny that you are driving us straight into a storm. Like I said, a competent captain would have diverted 50 nautical miles south to avoid the system entirely." I could not help but smile. It was a cold, predatory smile because Todd had just walked directly into a trap of his own making. I turned slightly to include the wealthy investors in the conversation, knowing exactly how much they valued calculated risk and accurate data. 50 nautical miles south," I said, projecting my voice clearly. "That is an interesting navigational strategy, Todd. Tell me, does your country club yachting expertise include basic maritime geography? Because if I had altered our course 50 nautical miles south, as you so confidently suggested, we would be plowing directly into the Great Bahama Bank. The water depth in that region drops to less than 20 feet. The Royal Azure has a draft of 28 feet. I paused, letting the undeniable mathematical reality sink in. If I took your advice, Todd, I would run a billion-dollar commercial vessel aground, tearing the hull open on a coral reef and triggering a massive international maritime disaster. But please tell me more about how you would navigate us to safety." The silence on the Lido deck was absolute. The only sound was the gentle sloshing of the water in the infinity pool and the steady hum of the wind. Todd stood completely frozen, his mouth slightly open but unable to form a single word. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. Chloe, who had been standing proudly next to him just moments before, suddenly took a step back, physically distancing herself from the profound humiliation radiating from her husband. My mother Vivian looked down at the teak wood floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The lead investor, a man who built his entire fortune on identifying capable leaders and exposing frauds, let out a harsh, dry laugh. He reached over and picked up his expensive leather portfolio from the lounge chair. He looked at Todd with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Hydrodynamic drag," the investor muttered, shaking his head slowly. "You know, Todd, when you pitched your tech startup to us, you used a lot of big words too. You promised us seamless integration and unparalleled market synergy. Now I am starting to wonder if those were just buzzwords you memorized to sound smart while steering our money directly into a reef." Todd, face drained of all color. "Wait, Richard," he pleaded, taking a desperate step toward the investor. "That is completely different. This is just a misunderstanding about boat terms. My software is solid. The coding is revolutionary. I can show you the projections right now." Richard held up a hand, stopping Todd in his tracks. Do not bother, Todd, he said, his voice laced with finality. I evaluate a man based on how he handles himself when he thinks he is the smartest person in the room. You just stood here and tried to cause a mass panic on a commercial cruise ship to stroke your own ego, and you got publicly dismantled by a woman who actually knows her job. If you are this arrogant and reckless with basic facts in public, I can only imagine the kind of disaster you are hiding in your company financials. We are done here. The funding is off the table. Richard turned to his associates and gave a curt nod. Pack it up, gentlemen, he ordered. We are moving to the indoor solarium. The air out here is suddenly feeling very cheap. The group of wealthy investors gathered their belongings and walked away without looking back. They brushed right past Todd, as if he were completely invisible. The rest of the passengers who had gathered around began to laugh softly, shaking their heads and returning to their lounge chairs. The threat of the storm had been completely neutralized not just by my explanation, but by the sheer entertainment of watching an arrogant bully get put exactly in his place. Todd stood entirely alone in the center of the cabana area. The massive tech deal he had been banking on, the deal that my parents had remortgaged their home to secure, was completely dead. It was gone in an instant, destroyed by his own uncontrollable need to prove he was better than me. Chloe let out a whimpering sound, covering her face with her hands. Vivian looked like she was about to faint, leaning heavily against the side of the cabana. They had enabled his toxic behavior for years, and now they were finally experiencing the devastating financial consequences of their blind loyalty. I looked at Todd, feeling no pity whatsoever. The universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. You spent your entire life trying to make other people feel small so you could feel big. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so only he and my family could hear me. You wanted an audience, Todd, I said softly. You wanted to show everyone who is really in charge. Well, congratulations. You definitely proved your point. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a ship to run. And since you are no longer occupied with your vital tech meetings, I highly suggest you go enjoy the complimentary tap water on deck 4. I turned my back on them and walked away. The wind was picking up as the edge of the squall finally reached us, bringing a refreshing mist of cool rain across the deck. I walked back to the executive elevator feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time in my life, my family had seen me not as their punching bag, but as an absolute force of nature. And the voyage was only just beginning. I did not go straight back to my command chair when I reached the bridge. Instead, I walked over to the dedicated security monitoring station and pulled up the archived footage from the Lido deck. I needed to see exactly what happened after I walked away. I needed to gauge just how dangerous Todd was going to be now that his billionaire disguise had been completely ripped away in front of his intended victims. On the high-definition screen, I watched the crowd disperse, leaving Todd and my family standing alone in the tropical rain. Todd was vibrating with a rage so intense it looked like it might tear him apart from the inside. He grabbed Chloe by the arm, his fingers digging into her skin. He pulled her close, ignoring my parents who were standing just a few feet away, looking completely shell-shocked. I turned up the isolated audio feed. Todd's voice was a harsh, venomous whisper. I am going to end her career tonight, he hissed to Chloe, his eyes darting frantically toward the security cameras, though he had no idea I was actually watching. She thinks she can humiliate me like that. She thinks she is untouchable because she is sitting up in that bridge. I am going to tear her down. I am going to make sure she never sets foot on a ship again. Chloe looked terrified, but she did not pull away. She just nodded, her face pale and streaked with ruined makeup. Okay, Todd, she whispered back. Just do whatever you have to do to fix this. I reached out and paused the footage. The threat was clear. Todd was a wounded animal backed into a corner of his own making. He had lost his funding, he had lost his prestige, and he was currently sleeping in a windowless room next to the diesel engines. He was desperate, and a desperate man with a background in software development was a specific kind of liability on a highly digitized modern cruise ship. I spent the next few hours meticulously reviewing the ship's security protocols. The squall passed quickly, just as my navigation officer had predicted, leaving behind a beautiful, clear evening over the Atlantic. The ship settled into a calm, luxurious rhythm as the thousands of passengers began preparing for the highly anticipated Captain's Gala. At 1900 hours, the bridge was bathed in the soft glow of instrument panels. I was dressed in my formal evening uniform, the heavy gold epaulets resting perfectly on my shoulders, the brass buttons polished to a mirror shine. I was scheduled to make my grand entrance in the main ballroom in exactly 1 hour to deliver the traditional welcome toast. I was just reviewing my speech when a sharp, piercing digital chime cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. It was not the general emergency alarm. It was a silent, specialized alert that only triggered on the primary command console and the chief security officer desk. A bright red light began pulsing rapidly on the network interface screen directly in front of me. Elias was at my side in a matter of seconds, his eyes locked on the flashing warning. "Captain, we have an unauthorized physical breach on the secondary network." Elias reported, his voice tight with immediate concern. Where I asked, pulling up the digital schematic of the ship. "Deck 4 aft corridor." Elias answered, tapping the screen to isolate the location. "It is server room beta. Someone has physically bypassed the magnetic lock on the maintenance panel and tapped directly into the hardware. Deck 4, the exact same deck where my family had been banished." I brought up the nearest CCTV camera feed. The corridor itself was empty, but the heavy metal door to the maintenance closet, which was supposed to be restricted to senior IT staff, was slightly ajar. "What network are they trying to access?" I asked, my fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the digital intrusion. Elias leaned over the console, his brow furrowed as he read the incoming data streams. "They are using a hardwired connection to bypass the guest Wi-Fi firewall. They are trying to access the ship's internal financial registry and the external communications mainframe. Captain, they are trying to interface with your direct command terminal IP address." A cold, calculating smile spread across my face. It was Todd. It had to be Todd. He was finally utilizing his tech startup skills, but instead of building an app, he was committing federal corporate espionage. It all made perfect sense. He was trying to access the financial registry to wipe the $2,000 champagne charge and cover up his declined credit card before my parents found out he was completely broke. But the external communications mainframe was the real prize. By spoofing my command terminal IP address, he was attempting to send a fake distress email or a fabricated corporate complaint directly to the Coast Guard and the cruise line executives. He wanted to manufacture a crisis under my name to prove I was unstable and incompetent. He was trying to frame me to get me fired. "Captain, shall I dispatch the security team?" Elias asked, reaching for his heavy radio. "We can have him in flex cuffs and dragged to the brig in under 2 minutes." I held up my hand, stopping Elias before he could transmit the order. "No, Mr. Elias," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Do not send security." Elias looked at me in genuine surprise. "Captain, he is actively attempting to breach our command network. That is a severe security threat." "He is attempting to breach it," I corrected him. "But he does not realize that Royal Azure Lines upgraded our cybersecurity infrastructure 6 months ago. Server room beta is a dummy relay. It is a secondary node. He cannot actually alter the financial logs or send external emails from there without a biometric override from this bridge." I quickly typed a command sequence into my console, activating a specialized protocol. "I am isolating his connection and routing it into a sandbox environment," I explained, watching the screen as the network silently trapped Todd in a secure digital cage. "He will see a fake interface. He will think he is successfully deleting his debt and sending his little emails, but all he is actually doing is generating a massive airtight log of federal cybercrimes." Elias watched the data flow on the screen, a look of profound respect washing over his face. "You are letting him dig his own grave, Captain. He wanted to prove he was a tech genius," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "I am just giving him the platform to do it." I pulled up a secondary window on my monitor and initiated a full screen capture of Todd digital intrusion. Every keystroke he made, every file he tried to manipulate, every fake message he typed out was being recorded in crystal clear high definition. I took the raw feed and routed it directly to the ship's audio-visual control room, the department responsible for the massive projection screens in the main ballroom. I looked at the clock on the wall. The captain's gala was starting in 45 minutes. Todd and my family were undoubtedly getting dressed in their cramped, windowless cabins, preparing to walk into that ballroom and pretend they were high society royalty. Todd believed he had just outsmarted the system. He believed he had successfully sabotaged my career and saved his own skin. He was going to walk into that party feeling like an absolute god. "Mr. Elias," I said, standing up and adjusting the cuffs of my formal blazer. "Please contact the AV department. Tell them I have a special multimedia presentation for my welcome toast tonight. I want the feed from this sandbox environment queued up and ready to project on the main screens the moment I give the signal." "Understood," Captain Elias said, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his stern, professional demeanor. "I will personally ensure the AV team has it locked and loaded." "Excellent," I nodded. "Let us go host a party. I believe my brother-in-law is expecting a spectacular show." Before heading down to the main ballroom to deliver my welcome toast, I needed to see exactly what kind of narrative Todd was trying to spin in his digital trap. The bridge was relatively quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of the navigation instruments as the ship cut smoothly through the dark Atlantic waters. Elias and I stood shoulder to shoulder over the primary security console, watching the compiled data stream from the sandbox environment I had just locked Todd inside. The high-definition camera in the Deck 4 aft corridor provided a crystal-clear view of the physical breach. Todd was crouched near the low-gray maintenance panel, looking entirely out of place in his expensive linen resort wear. He had pried the magnetic cover off the wall using what looked like a metal nail file he had probably stolen from Chloe Vanity Kit. He had a small, sleek black laptop balanced precariously on his knee, connected via a thick USB cable directly into the dummy diagnostic port. He was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve and darting his eyes nervously up and down the empty hallway like a paranoid thief. On the adjacent monitor, we watched a live digital mirror of his laptop display. Because I had routed his connection into an isolated simulated environment, he genuinely believed he was inside the ship's central operational mainframe. His first priority was predictably entirely self-serving. He navigated straight to the passenger billing directory. It took him less than 3 minutes to bypass the fake security prompts I had generated and isolate his assigned cabin number. I watched the cursor on his screen highlight the $2,000 charge for the stolen vintage champagne. He hit the delete key, instantly zeroing out his balance. But he did not stop there. He navigated to the onboard credit allocation menu and assigned himself a $50,000 spending limit, digitally forging my authorization code to approve the transaction. On the hallway camera, Todd let out a visible heavy sigh of relief, a smug, arrogant smile spreading across his face. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had completely outsmarted the system and secured his luxury vacation for free. If he had simply unplugged his laptop and walked away right then, his crimes would have been limited to financial fraud. But Todd was an incredibly small and vindictive man. The smile on his face quickly hardened into something much more malicious. He did not disconnect the cable. Instead, he opened a secure command terminal prompt, navigating away from the financial servers and heading directly for the external communications mainframe. Elias stiffened beside me, his large hands resting flat on the console. Captain Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "He is attempting to access the emergency transmission protocols." "Let him type," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the mirrored screen. "Let us see exactly how far he is willing to go." Todd began drafting a direct outbound message using the ship's spoofed IP address. He was addressing the email to the United States Coast Guard District 7 Command Center located in Miami. I read the words exactly as they appeared on the screen one by one. The message claimed to be an urgent whistleblower report from an anonymous senior bridge officer. It stated that Captain Kendra Washington was completely intoxicated, behaving erratically and actively ignoring severe weather warnings to maintain a reckless speed. The email went on to claim that I was verbally abusive to the crew and had threatened violence against passengers who questioned my navigation. The message concluded by explicitly requesting an immediate Coast Guard interception and a forced federal relief of command, citing an imminent and critical danger to the lives of the 3,000 passengers on board. A fake distress call is not a harmless prank. In the maritime industry, it is one of the most severe federal offenses a person can commit. It diverts critical emergency resources away from actual life or death situations. If that message had actually gone through the Coast Guard, would not have simply called the ship to check in. They would have scrambled heavily armed interceptor boats and tactical helicopters. They would have boarded the Royal Azure by force, terrified thousands of innocent vacationers, and permanently destroyed my professional reputation in the process. Todd was perfectly willing to trigger a massive federal raid on my vessel and traumatize innocent people, all because his fragile ego could not handle paying for a bottle of champagne and taking orders from a black woman. He was actively trying to destroy my entire life. I watched Todd hit the send button on his laptop. The sandbox environment instantly generated a highly realistic official-looking confirmation graphic telling him the high-priority message was successfully transmitted to Homeland Security. On the hallway camera, Todd closed his laptop with a sharp, satisfying click. He quickly disconnected the cable and snapped the gray maintenance panel back into place, leaving no obvious physical trace of his tampering. He stood up, smoothed out the wrinkles in his linen shirt, and walked away down the corridor carrying himself with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. Elias turned to me, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. "Captain, this goes far beyond petty theft or verbal disrespect," Elias said, his tone deadly serious. "This is a deliberate, calculated attempt to sabotage the vessel and invoke a federal emergency response. We have him dead to rights. I can have a security detail down at his cabin in 2 minutes. We can place him in flex cuffs and secure him in the brig right now." I reached out and tapped the console, saving the entire sandbox session. I logged every keystroke, every timestamp, every fabricated financial document, and every frame of the hallway video. "No, Mr. Elias," I said, my voice completely detached and icy cold. "Arresting him in the shadows of Deck 4 is exactly what he wants. He wants to be the silent martyr. If we lock him up now, my parents will spend the rest of the voyage telling anyone who will listen that I am a vindictive tyrant who abused my power to silence a brilliant tech CEO. They will spin a narrative where Todd is the victim. I am not going to give them that opportunity." I finalized the data compilation into a secure encrypted folder. "Package this raw data file and send it directly to the Port Authority FBI liaison in Miami," I ordered. "Tell them we have a passenger who has actively attempted to transmit fraudulent federal distress signals and tamper with maritime navigation networks. We will hold him in our custody on board until we return to port for federal processing." Elias nodded sharply, tapping his own screen to execute the secure data transfer to the mainland authorities. "And what about the AV department?" Captain Elias asked, a rare gleam of genuine anticipation appearing in his eyes. "Do they still get their copy for the gala tonight?" "Oh, absolutely," I said, a cold thrill settling deep in my chest. "Send the high-definition video file of him physically hacking the panel and the exact screen capture of his fake Coast Guard email to the ballroom control booth. Have them cue it up to the primary projector system." I turned away from the monitors and walked over to the reflective glass of the bridge windows. I looked at my reflection, checking the alignment of my uniform. The gold stripes gleamed flawlessly under the lights. The investigation was complete, and the evidence was completely irrefutable. For my entire life, my family had demanded that I shrink myself to make room for their delusions. They had celebrated Todd as a genius while treating me like a servant. Todd believed he was going to walk into that ballroom tonight as the secret mastermind who had just saved the ship from a disastrous captain. He was expecting to drink free cocktails and bask in his own perceived brilliance. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer one last time, taking a deep, steadying breath. It was time to give my brother-in-law the exact level of public recognition he deserved. I turned back to Elias and gave a curt nod. "The bridge is yours, Mr. Elias. I have a party to host." I stepped out of the executive elevator onto Deck 6, and the sound of a live string quartet immediately washed over me. The Starlight Ballroom was the crown jewel of the Royal Azure. It was a massive multi-level space decorated in deep navy and gold, with towering crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, elegant glow over the 500 elite guests in attendance. Waiters in white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying trays of top-shelf champagne and caviar canapes. It was a room designed to celebrate the pinnacle of wealth and success. I stood on the mezzanine balcony overlooking the main floor, hidden from view for a moment, to survey the room before my official introduction. It did not take me long to spot my family. They had planted themselves right in the center of the room near the primary ice sculpture, determined to be the center of attention. Chloe was the first person who caught my eye. She was wearing a breathtaking emerald green designer gown featuring intricate beadwork and a sweeping train. I recognized the dress immediately. It was the exclusive display piece from the high-end boutique on Deck 7, a dress that retailed for nearly $8,000. A cold suspicion crept into my mind. I pulled my secure comms device from my pocket and sent a quick text to Maria, the chief purser, asking her to verify how my sister acquired the gown, given the hard lock on her financial account. Maria replied less than a minute later. The message confirmed exactly what I suspected. Chloe had walked into the boutique claiming she left her keycard in her suite. She used her charm and a fake room number, specifically the penthouse suite assigned to Richard, the lead investor, to bypass the system and charge the dress directly to his account. She had committed outright identity theft just to look the part of a billionaire wife for one evening. I put my device away, shaking my head in disgust. Beside Chloe, my parents Vivian and James were actively working the room. They had cornered a group of older wealthy couples who were too polite to walk away. I watched my mother gesture grandly, pointing toward Todd, who was standing a few feet away, holding a fresh cocktail. Even from the balcony, I could read my mother's lips. She was boasting about her son-in-law, calling him a visionary tech genius and bragging about how his company was revolutionizing the digital marketplace. She was digging their social grave deeper with every word, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man she was praising was currently the target of an active federal cybercrime investigation. Todd looked incredibly smug. He was downing his drink with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully hacked the ship, deleted his debts, and ruined my career. He actually believed that by tomorrow morning I would be escorted off the vessel in disgrace, while he enjoyed the rest of his luxury cruise. He caught the eye of a passing waiter, snapped his fingers disrespectfully, and swapped his empty glass for a fresh one. I gave the signal to the event coordinator standing near the balcony stairs. The string quartet smoothly brought their piece to a close, and a hush fell over the magnificent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the cruise director announced, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Please direct your attention to the grand staircase and join me in welcoming the master of the vessel's senior fleet, Captain Kendra Washington." The spotlight hit me as I began my descent. The heavy gold epaulets on my shoulders gleamed, and the crisp tailoring of my formal uniform demanded absolute respect. 500 elite guests broke into enthusiastic applause. I walked down the sweeping staircase, with my head held high, feeling the powerful hum of my ship beneath my feet. I made my way to the crystal podium set up on the main stage. The massive digital projection screens behind me displayed the elegant gold and navy logo of the Royal Azure. I looked out over the sea of faces, my eyes scanning the crowd until they landed directly on my family. Chloe was smiling, pretending to be the proud sister for the benefit of the wealthy women standing next to her. Vivian and James were clapping politely, though their eyes were cold and resentful. Todd simply smirked, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his stolen champagne. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone, commanding the complete attention of the room. It is my absolute honor to welcome you to the Captain's Gala. We have gathered tonight to celebrate the beauty of the ocean, the luxury of this magnificent vessel, and the remarkable people who sail with us. I paused, offering a warm professional smile to the crowd, before letting my gaze lock onto Todd. Speaking of remarkable people, I continued, my tone shifting from formal hospitality to a sharp, calculated edge. We have a very unique guest with us tonight, a man who claims to be at the absolute forefront of digital innovation. In fact, he has spent the entire day assuring anyone who will listen that his technological expertise is far superior to the systems that run this billion-dollar ship. The crowd chuckled softly, assuming this was a light-hearted piece of interactive entertainment. Todd puffed out his chest, standing a little taller. He completely missed the danger in my voice. He thought I was finally surrendering. He thought I was publicly acknowledging his superiority because he had successfully hacked my network and forced my hand. My brother-in-law, Todd, I announced, extending my hand toward him. Todd, why do you not come up here and join me on stage? I believe a tech genius of your caliber deserves the opportunity to explain his innovative solutions to this esteemed crowd. My mother, Vivian, beamed with pride, gently pushing Todd forward. Go on, honey, she whispered loudly. Tell them about your company. Todd handed his glass to Chloe and practically strutted up to the stage. He adjusted his linen blazer, flashing a $1,000,000 smile at the audience. He stepped up to the podium, standing right next to me, and confidently reached for the microphone. He was drunk on free liquor and completely intoxicated by his own massive ego. Thank you, Captain Todd, said his voice dripping with condescension. It is true, I do have a background in complex network architecture. My startup focuses on seamless data integration and disrupting traditional security firewalls. It is all about finding the vulnerabilities in outdated systems and exploiting them for maximum efficiency. He looked out at the crowd, specifically trying to make eye contact with Richard and the other Silicon Valley investors, hoping to win them back with his buzzwords. Exploiting vulnerabilities. I repeated, stepping slightly to the side to give him the full spotlight. That is a fascinating choice of words, Todd. Tell me, does that innovative portfolio of yours include corporate espionage? Todd frowned, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Excuse me? He asked, leaning away from the microphone. I did not repeat the question. Instead, I looked to the back of the room where Chief Officer Elias was standing near the audio-visual control booth. I gave Elias a single sharp nod. The lighting in the ballroom dimmed instantly. The massive digital screens behind the podium flickered. The elegant Royal Azure logo vanished. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom of 500 guests. Todd turned around to look at the screens, and the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale white. Projected in massive high-definition video for the entire elite echelon of the ship to see was the Deck 4 aft corridor. The footage clearly showed Todd crouched on the floor, sweating and terrified, using a stolen nail file to pry open a restricted maintenance panel. The video played in a continuous loop, showing him plugging his black laptop directly into the ship's hardware. But the presentation did not stop there. A secondary window opened on the massive screens, displaying the exact mirrored capture of his laptop display. The audience watched in stunned, horrified silence as Todd Cursor navigated to the passenger billing directory. They watched him illegally delete his $2,000 champagne debt and forge a $50,000 onboard credit line using my stolen authorization code. Then the final piece of evidence appeared on the screen: the fake Coast Guard distress email. Every single word of his fabricated report, claiming I was intoxicated, abusive, and a danger to the ship, was projected in 10-foot-high letters for everyone to read. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. The wealthy investors Vivian had just been boasting to stepped away from her in absolute disgust. Richard, The lead investor simply shook his head, pulling his phone from his pocket, likely calling his legal team to ensure his firm was completely severed from Todd failing company. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the room, her hands covering her mouth. The women who had been admiring her emerald green dress moments before were now looking at her with profound suspicion. I picked up the microphone, stepping right next to Todd, who was trembling so violently he looked like he might collapse. "Is corporate espionage part of your portfolio, Todd?" I asked, my voice echoing like thunder through the silent ballroom. "Or was this just a desperate attempt to delete your debts and avoid paying for your wife's stolen dress?" Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical shriek. "Stolen!" she cried out. "Yes, Chloe," I answered, not breaking eye contact with Todd. "Maria from guest services verified it 5 minutes ago. You charged that $8,000 gown to Penthouse Suite 1004. You committed identity theft because your husband has completely bankrupted your family." My father James let out a sound that was half gasp, half groan, gripping the edge of a cocktail table to keep from falling over. My mother, Vivian, looked wildly around the room, realizing that her carefully constructed high society facade was not just cracked, it was completely annihilated. Everyone in the room knew they were frauds. Todd's brain completely short-circuited. The sheer crushing weight of public exposure, combined with the realization that he was facing decades in federal prison, broke whatever fragile grip he had left on reality. He realized he had never hacked the ship. He realized I had trapped him, played him, and dragged him onto a stage to broadcast his crimes to the world. His humiliation morphed instantly into pure, blind, violent rage. "You set me up!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You trapped me, you arrogant diversity hire!" He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a deafening screech of audio feedback. With his face twisted into an ugly mask of hatred, Todd lunged directly at me, his hands reaching aggressively for my throat. Todd did not even make it halfway across the stage. Before his hands could come anywhere near my uniform, Chief Officer Elias and two massive ship security guards intercepted him with terrifying speed and precision. Elias tackled Todd around the waist, driving him hard into the polished hardwood floor of the stage. The impact made a loud, sickening thud that echoed through the entire ballroom. Todd thrashed violently, kicking his legs and screaming obscenities, but he was completely outmatched. One of the security guards pinned his arms behind his back, while the other drove a knee into his shoulder, holding him firmly in place. The sharp metallic click of heavy-duty flex cuffs securing his wrists sounded incredibly loud in the dead silent room. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I stood perfectly still at the crystal podium, looking down at the man who had spent the last 24 hours trying to destroy my life. He was pinned to the floor, panting heavily, his face pressed against the wood, his designer linen suit wrinkled and completely ruined. I leaned forward and spoke directly into the microphone, my voice calm, steady, and vibrating with absolute authority. "Under the provisions of the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, I am officially placing you under arrest for attempting to transmit a fraudulent federal distress signal and for physically tampering with a commercial maritime navigation network. You are a direct threat to the safety of this vessel." I looked up from Todd and turned my gaze to Elias. "Take him to the brig, Mr. Elias. He is to remain in solitary confinement, under 24-hour guard until we return to the port of Miami and hand him over to federal authorities." "Yes," Captain Elias responded, his voice tight from the physical exertion. He and the two guards hauled Todd roughly to his feet. Todd was no longer shouting. The reality of the flex cuffs biting into his wrists and the word federal echoing in his ears had finally broken him. He looked out at the sea of 500 elite guests staring at him with profound disgust, and he hung his head completely defeated. They marched him off the stage and out the side service doors of the ballroom, disappearing into the hidden security corridors of the ship. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my blazer, and looked out at the stunned audience. "I am incredibly sorry for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, offering a reassuring professional smile. The security of this vessel and its passengers is my absolute highest priority. The threat has been completely neutralized, and our systems remain fully secure. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The champagne is flowing, and the culinary team has prepared an extraordinary menu for you tonight. The string quartet, taking my cue, immediately struck up a lively, elegant symphony. The tension in the room began to dissipate as the waiters quickly resumed circulating with their silver trays. The wealthy guests turned back to their conversations, shaking their heads and murmuring about the absolute disgrace they had just witnessed. I stepped down from the podium and walked purposefully toward my family. They were standing frozen near the ice sculpture, looking like they had just watched a ghost rise from the dead. Chloe's face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes wide with shock. My mother Vivian was trembling, holding on to my father James, whose face had gone a sickening shade of gray. "Follow me," I commanded, not waiting for an answer. I turned and walked toward the private executive VIP lounge adjacent to the main ballroom, holding the heavy oak door open for them. They shuffled inside like prisoners walking to the gallows. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, cutting off the music and the chatter of the ballroom, the carefully constructed dam, holding back their reality, completely shattered. Chloe collapsed onto a plush velvet sofa, burying her face in her hands and letting out a loud, agonizing wail. It was not her usual manipulative crying. It was a raw, visceral sound of absolute despair. "What just happened?" Vivian demanded, her voice shrill and frantic. She rushed over to Chloe, shaking her shoulder. "Chloe, what was that video? What did Todd do? Why did they arrest him? Tell me this is some kind of horrible misunderstanding." Chloe looked up, her face a mess of tears and ruined makeup. "There is no misunderstanding, Mom," she sobbed, gasping for air. "It is all gone. Everything is gone." "What is gone?" My father barked, his voice cracking with panic. He stepped closer to his daughter, his fists clenched at his sides. "The company, the funding, what are you talking about?" "The company is completely bankrupt," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing harshly in the private room. "It has been bankrupt for 6 months. The app was a failure. The code never worked. Todd lied to the investors. He lied to the bank." Vivian stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in fierce denial. "No, that is impossible. We just gave him the second mortgage money. $200,000. Where did it go?" "It went to his creditors," Chloe cried, her whole body shaking. "And to the country club fees. And to the lease on the sports car." He was trying to keep up appearances so he could secure the next round of funding, but nobody would buy the pitch. And then the IRS started auditing us. The letters IRS hung in the air like a death sentence. My father grabbed the back of a leather armchair, his knuckles turning white. "They are investigating him for massive tax fraud." Chloe continued, her words spilling out in a desperate, frantic rush. "He owes millions, Mom. Millions. We are completely underwater. That is why we booked this cruise." "You booked a luxury cruise while you were millions of dollars in debt?" Vivian asked, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "We were not going on a vacation," Chloe sobbed, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Todd picked an itinerary that stopped at a non-extradition island in the Caribbean. We were going to get off the ship in 2 days and never come back. We were running away. He was trying to hack the ship network tonight to wipe our remaining credit card debt and send a fake distress signal so the Coast Guard would be distracted while we slipped away at the next port." The absolute silence that followed her confession was suffocating. The entire house of cards had violently collapsed. The perfect golden child and her tech genius husband were nothing more than broke, desperate criminals trying to flee the country. My father James slowly sank into a chair, staring blankly at the wall. "The house," he whispered, his voice hollow and dead. "The house your grandmother left us. We put it up as collateral for the business loan. If the company is bankrupt, the bank will foreclose. We are going to lose our home." "We lost everything," Vivian cried out, bursting into heavy, uncontrollable sobs. She looked at her husband, and then at her sobbing daughter, her entire world completely destroyed by the lies she had so eagerly enabled. And then my mother slowly turned her head and looked at me. I was standing quietly by the door, my arms folded across my chest, my uniform immaculate. I watched the desperation register in her eyes, the realization that I was the only person left in the room who actually had money power and stability. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her tears, and rushed over to me, her hands pleadingly outstretched. Kendra, she begged, her voice thick with panic. Kendra, you have to help us. You make hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have stock in this cruise line. You are a captain. You can pay off the IRS. You can buy the house back from the bank before they foreclose. We are your family. We need you. Please, you have to save us. My father looked up from his chair, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. Please, Kendra, he added, his voice barely a whisper. We will do anything. I looked at the people who had spent my entire life telling me I was worthless. I looked at the mother who had refused to co-sign my student loans because she thought my dreams were a bad investment. I looked at the father who had told me just yesterday that I was a disappointment who drove boats for a living. I looked at the sister who had tried to charge an $8,000 dress to a stolen room number while actively fleeing a federal investigation. They were not sorry for how they treated me. They were only sorry that their golden ticket had turned out to be counterfeit. I slowly lowered my arms and looked my mother dead in the eye. You want me to save you? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of emotion. Yes, Vivian sobbed, nodding frantically. Please, Kendra. We have nothing left. I took a step back, putting physical distance between us. When I needed you to believe in me, you told me I was a foolish little girl who did not belong on the ocean. I said my words cutting through the room with absolute precision. You bet your entire legacy on a man who threw a $50 gift card in my face and told me to get out of his terminal. You told me I was a bad investment. I paused, letting the undeniable truth of my words sink into their minds. I am a captain. Mom. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. My job is to navigate storms and keep my ship afloat. But your ship, you put the holes in it yourselves, and I am not going down with you. I turned my back on them, reaching for the heavy brass handle of the door. You cannot just leave us here! Chloe screamed from the sofa, her voice turning vicious. You are a monster! You are abandoning your own family! I pulled the door open, the sound of the string quartet from the ballroom washing over me once again. I am not abandoning you, Chloe, I said without looking back. I am just leaving you at the table you chose for yourselves. I walked out of the VIP lounge, letting the heavy door swing shut behind me, sealing them inside their own self-made prison. The rest of the 2-week voyage proceeded flawlessly. I commanded my ship with the precision and grace I had spent 15 years perfecting. I dined with the wealthy investors who now treated me with profound respect, having witnessed my ability to handle a crisis under immense pressure. I guided the Royal Azure through the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean, ensuring my passengers had the vacation of a lifetime. And down on Deck 4, in a windowless room next to the diesel engines, my parents and my sister sat in agonizing silence, eating the complimentary buffet food and waiting for the inevitable end. Todd remained locked in solitary confinement, in the brig, eating basic rations and speaking to absolutely no one. 14 days later, the brilliant Miami skyline appeared on the horizon. The early morning sun reflected off the glass skyscrapers as I expertly navigated the massive vessel through the channel and guided her smoothly into her designated berth at the port terminal. The heavy mooring lines were secured and the gangways were lowered. I stood on the bridge wing high above the bustling port, looking down at the concrete pier. Waiting directly at the base of the primary gangway were 3 black SUV vehicles with their lights flashing. 5 federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers with FBI printed in bright yellow letters, stood waiting alongside 4 armed Port Authority police officers. I watched as ship security escorted Todd down the gangway. He was still wearing the same wrinkled linen suit he had worn on the night of the gala. His hands were heavily cuffed behind his back, and his head was hung so low his chin rested on his chest. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely broken. The federal agents immediately took custody of him, reading him his rights and shoving him into the back of one of the black vehicles. A few minutes later, my family emerged from the standard passenger gangway. They dragged their heavy luggage behind them, moving slowly and aimlessly. They were entirely alone. They had no driver waiting for them. They had no VIP terminal access. They had no home to return to in Atlanta, and no money to buy a plane ticket. Vivian, James, and Chloe stood on the hot concrete of the Miami port, surrounded by thousands of happy vacationers heading home to their normal lives. They looked lost, completely stripped of their arrogance and their illusions. Chloe happened to look up. She shielded her eyes from the bright Florida sun and looked toward the towering bridge of the Royal Azure. I stepped forward to the very edge of the bridge wing, ensuring she could see me clearly against the blue sky. I was dressed in my crisp white uniform, the gold stripes catching the morning light. Chloe nudged my mother. Vivian and James looked up, staring at the woman they had cast aside, the woman who now commanded an empire. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply stood at perfect military attention, raised my right hand, and executed one final sharp, crisp salute. Then I turned my back on them and walked back inside the bridge. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, blocking out the noise of the port. The air conditioning was cool, and the bridge was quiet and calm. Elias was waiting by the command console, holding a fresh cup of black coffee for me. All passengers disembarked and accounted for Captain Elias reported, handing me the mug. The Port Authority has cleared our security logs. We are fully restocked and ready for the next manifest. I took a sip of the hot coffee, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace settle over my entire body. I had finally severed the chains of their toxic expectations. I had reclaimed my narrative and protected my sanctuary. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was exactly who I was born to be. "Excellent, Mr. Elias," I said, setting the mug down and taking my seat in the command chair. "Secure all gangways. Prepare the crew for departure. Let us set sail." As the massive engines hummed to life beneath me, pushing the ship away from the dock and out toward the endless open ocean, I knew I was finally truly free. Have you ever had to walk away from people who tried to pull you under just to keep yourself afloat? Let me know your stories in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that the best revenge is simply a life well lived. Until next time, keep steering your own ship and never let anyone tell you that you do not belong at the helm.